in the society. And then we have this new era with digitalization, globalization, and environmental challenges, which we also need to cater for. We need to be very conscious of global warming, and that is really important. So we have to give the future generation hope that there will be future, and there actually can be better future, and maybe there will be answers to the challenges. And the answers probably are not the same. We can't have the same answers or the same means for answers to answer these challenges what we have used to make the challenges. So our young people need to have new ways, thinking out of the box to find the solutions for the current challenges. And then we yesterday heard quite a few times about learning crises, meaning that going to school is not the same as having quality education. Now, it's a good thing that most of the kids in this globe go to school. That's a very, very good start. And if you think a couple of decades earlier, that was not the case. But now we have most of the kids at school. That's good. And then the next thing is education in schools. And then teachers here are the key players, because if they are motivated, if they are qualified, and if they are committed to the teaching profession, then they will provide the good education for the young children. And the World Development Report just from early this year was published, says that teachers' skills and motivation are the key forces in quality education. We also should have professional development throughout the teaching career. When the teacher graduates from teacher education program, there still needs to have future professional development, because the world is changing rapidly. And we need to have pre-service teacher education that include practical classroom training from the beginning. In many countries, the practical training, the actual work at schools, happens maybe at the end of the teaching program. But this World Report suggests that the practical training in classrooms should start in the very beginning of the teacher education. At University of Lapland, where I am from, in our teacher education program, our first year students go to practical training in November. Actually, I think that they are there at the moment. And they started their studies in September. So they go there to observe, they go there to see the real work, and then they come back to university and they have some idea of what school is about from teachers' perspective. And then they can look at and they see their studies at university differently when they have this hands-on experience at classrooms. And in-service teacher education, we heard about that. Also, yesterday, the World Report suggests that it should be practical, because teaching profession is a very practical profession. You do things and work in practice with kids and young people. So it needs to be practical, it needs to be long-term. And this is something that in Finland we are developing now, is this long-term professional development for teachers. Not just day there and day there, but a long-term approach. I like this picture there. I would love us as teachers, teacher educators, to see us as lions. Because what we can see, I think that we can achieve as well. Finnish responses to this learning crisis. We want to make sure that Finland is the leading country in education also in the future. and for future learning and inspiring education. And for that, we want to develop new pedagogical approaches and new kind of learning environments. And we also concentrate on teachers' competencies. And one thing that is very evident, I think, for all of us is the digitalization and how we can use it in teacher education. And as we heard yesterday from Estonian minister, the digitalization does not replace teachers. But the digital means can actually promote learning in many ways. It can bring some gamification, some playfulness to learning. It can help the students, kids to practice the thing again and again and again. So it makes that kind of learning fun. And also new ways of producing learning and producing knowledge together with other kids. In a new world, we can connect to anybody in the world, and kids do that at school, that they are in connect with other kids, other side of the world, and they share their learning, they share their life experiences. One teacher in Rovaniemi, Finland, has been in touch with Canadian kids which are the same age, and the kids are sending letters, emails to each other, sending photos and discussing their ways of living in these two places. And that's something that this digitalization is. Yes? Yeah.
Merci beaucoup. Yeah. Voilà. Merci, Madame Tuija. Yeah. Est-ce qu'on pourrait peut-être développer la suite lors des échanges quand les gens poseront des questions?
Sorry.
Vous voulez que je vous donne 1 minute de plus? Juste 1 minute? Je voudrais vous donner 1 minute supplémentaire pour finir, s'il vous plaît. I give you a minute, just a minute.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the Finnish Teacher Education Forum is one answer to this. It was established in 2016, and 100 teacher educators and teachers, student teachers, are taking part of that. And this is I think that the picture of the future skills and competencies we would like to have our teachers to see, to develop. It's about expertise and agency to create new innovations. It's a continuous development of personal and competencies and the community, and extensive basic competencies. And these 3 areas are now in key role in Finnish teacher education and also in the professional development and in-service teacher education. And this is quite ambitious, but there are lots of projects currently going on in Finland which promote these 3 areas of teachers' competencies and skills for the future. Okay, thank you.
Merci. Merci, je demande qu'on l'applaudisse très fort. Merci beaucoup, Madame Tuija, pour cette présentation très riche qui rend compte un peu d'une expérience inclusive en matière de décision pour les enseignants et qui, vous savez, ce n'est pas tous les jours qu'on a la voisine du Père Noël avec soi. Donc, nous vous remercions pour cette présentation très riche. Je pense que tout à l'heure, les gens auront à poser beaucoup de questions et retenir également que ce sous-thème va continuer à être développé dans les discussions et même dans les sessions de partage. Donc, nous avons retenu la question philosophique sur l'avenir et de l'humanité et de la Terre quand on réfléchit sur le développement des enseignants et le développement de l'éducation. Merci. Je vais donner la parole tout de suite à Monsieur Peter GREENWOOD, donc ancien professeur d'université, expert de l'Union européenne et de l'UNESCO, qui va nous faire la présentation autour du 2e sous-thème, formation des enseignants, compétences et aptitudes pour le travail. Vous avez une quinzaine de minutes aussi. Merci.
UNESCO-UNEVOC network in Bonn. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a great pleasure to be here, particularly as we're going to be addressing the issue of the TVET workforce. Okay, brilliant, thank you. And it's a real, we're extremely appreciative of the fact that the TVET workforce is now high up on the list of priority areas for this, this forum. So what I'd like to do briefly is to go through some background for my presentation. Who are the TVET workforce and why do they matter? Some of the current challenges. What are the priorities for a systemic development of the TVET workforce? And how do we want to invest the breakout session? So first of all, the background in terms of the regulation. This is a UNESCO initiative, so what is the regulatory background for this discussion on TVET workforce? So if we go back to 1966. Ooh, that's exciting. Oh. Okay, let me continue. I hope that the slides will catch up with me. So since 1966 to 2015, there was little attention to the issue of the TVET workforce. But suddenly, there's an explosion of interest around 2015 with the Incheon Declaration, the TVET recommendation in 2015, which came to the conclusion that the quality and relevance of vocational education and training was reliant completely, largely on the quality of the teachers and instructors. This was followed by the UNESCO TVET recommendation, TVET strategy, which identified a number of is that me? Which identified 3 strategic objectives for the development of the TVET workforce. Their professional development, capacity building of teacher training institutions and their managers, and to build up the evidence base through country and regional studies. And this is being followed by a monitoring recommendation, which is in preparation, which again emphasizes the fact that the TVET workforce is an integral part of the education and training workforce. Now, who is the workforce? What are we talking about in terms of the players? Well, we're talking about the TVET teachers, the teachers in the classroom, the instructors who are also working in the schools, but also the in-company trainers and instructors, and also those that are working, for example, for territorial bodies, developing courses or delivering learning programs for the unemployed. So these are colleagues, these are players who are not only in the education system, but they're also outside the education system. And this creates its own special complication. I'm just a bit nervous about what's going on behind me. So, why has there been such a spike in interest in the TVET workforce? And I think this comes from the changes in work and life which are going on outside the education and training system. I think we're all familiar with the headlines about the new types of jobs that may come with the greening exercise, the greening developments. New shortages, particularly for digital literacy. Creating new business, the emphasis on entrepreneurship. Innovation and its role in economic and social development. But skills are needed for innovation, not only technology. The new types of transversal skills that are coming through across the labour market and across our lives, through digital developments, through greening, through entrepreneurship. These are creating a new level of transversal skills. And finally, from the other side, the kind of threat side, there is the the potential, the actual fall in demand for cognitive and manual skills, which are threatening particularly let's say, the lower levels in the labor market. Now, all of these create new demands for skills, and the main providers of those demands for skills are, of course, the TVET workforce. So why... Okay, I'm beginning to learn. So why then the TVET workforce matters? Well, they're the key players in learning for work and life, the transversal skills. They're bringing a dual professionalism, so the teaching and technical vocational skills. They're the single most contributor, as this has been expressed in several of the presentations so far, to the outcomes of the education and training system, and in particular for the TVET system, and we're talking about then ISCED levels 3, 4, and 5, where TVET creates an increasing role, if you like. And of course, the TVET players, the TVET workforce, are fundamental for any other reforms or changes to the workforce. Without their engagement, reforms, developments are facing an uphill struggle. They are strategic players for the cooperation between the education and training system and business, and vice versa, between the business and the education and training system. And of course, they're the main actors for in-company training and training for the unemployed. So they have a fundamental role in developing the skills that we need in our new societies and economies. Now, largely, we place the emphasis on change on the policy and system levels. This is the traditional way in which we tend to work. But then the question here is this challenge now, in this context, the challenge just for policymakers? We asked this question at the UNESCO Global Forum, the Global Learning Forum, in May this year. And the answers that we got back were quite interesting. You see, you don't, sorry. You see some of the quotations from this meeting, which talked about empowering teachers and trainers in innovative school cultures, the active and open engagement with local economic, territorial, and social stakeholders, the need for flexible pathways, broader occupational profiles and not single specific jobs, encouraging new pedagogical processes, and placing emphasis on the need for localized activities, localized innovation. And as a result of this, we were encouraged to work much more closely with the schools and with the enterprises as the leaders, if you like, of the changes in the demands on the TVET workforce. The policy and system development, of course, remains important, but it's struggling to keep up. So in this case, more demand comes from the school side and the enterprise side. You noted before that one of the parts of the strategy, the UNESCO strategy, is to develop the evidence base for TVET, the TVET workforce. And you're probably quite familiar with the education policy reviews, regional analyses that have been published recently on, for example, South Africa, the Arab region. There's one just coming out in the kind of Caribbean region. There's a lot of work being done with the ILO, the World Bank, OECD, and bilateral donors, including the GIZ, for example, has been also developing the education base, the evidence base, sorry. So what are then, if you look at some of the common issues that come up in these reviews, and I try to put them in policy, system, school, and company dimensions, because that's the way in which we're kind of proposing to think about this during today. And what you see in terms of the challenges are an inadequate integration of education and training policy and the TVET workforce. They're not connected enough. the negative stigma for the TVET, and this has an implication on the TVET workforce. So TVET is an unattractive career path. At a system level, well, there's little attention being given to the preparation of the specific TVET workforce. For example, developing the competency standards that might be needed for TVET. And there's a slow rate, the struggle to innovate the education and training of our teachers with what's happening on the outside. At a school level, there are issues of recognition and empowerment. Yeah, the centralized curricula we were referring to yesterday in the discussions. Access, availability of continuing professional development, difficulties with the recruitment and aging workforces. Cooperation with industry, particularly in centralized workforces. And then we have the company dimension, the specific needs of in-company workforces and limited opportunities for work-based learning. The Caribbean study that we've just finalizing, and I have here a copy. So this study is about to be published. You should get it, I hope, for your end of year, your Christmas presents, if you want to order it. The Caribbean study, which we'll go into during the breakout session, paints a slightly nuanced picture of what's happening. There is progress in terms of the policy level, but TVET remains an unattractive profession. At a system level, there's clearly improving quality of the TVET workforce, particularly in the pre-service, but there are difficulties in relating the system level with the industrial development in the countries. At a school dimension, there are recruitment shortages and low empowerment of the TVET workforce and limited opportunities to gain technical skills in the workplace. But on the other hand, in the company side, there are emerging continuing professional development opportunities that are happening in the region. So it's positive, but there are limited opportunities, there are limited workplace placements for trainers and trainees. So what then could be the priorities for us to look at? So, and this is what we're suggesting to look at during the breakout sessions. So how do you integrate TVET and education and training and sectoral policy? How do you place the TVET workforce properly in those policy developments? How do you incentivize them? How do you incentivize the TVET workforce and provide them with careers? How do you build capacity for the TVET institutions? How do you empower and recognize the TVET workforce in schools to deliver 21st century skills? Broadening cooperation as well between schools and the territorial bodies. And then finally, at a school level, at a company level, how do you increase support for pedagogy, the pedagogy of trainers in the companies? We're proposing to continue to build up the evidence base that I referred to before. So looking at the role of the TVET workforce in education policy reviews, continuing regional and thematic studies. So there's one under development in the Mediterranean region on in-company trainers, encouraging platforms, so opportunities such as this to talk about the TVET workforce, and then finally to mobilize the interagency, so the international community, to pay more attention to this issue. So if I look towards the breakout session, we'll look at the policy level, guided by Professor Jailani Yunus from Malaysia. So what are the challenges? What are the opportunities to integrate the TVET workforce at the policy level? Dr. Charmaine Barrett will present part of the findings of this recent study in the Caribbean region and look at how to develop the TVET system, the teacher training system. Reinaldo Hernandez from GEOC in Chile will help us to look at how schools are adapting to the challenges that they're facing on an everyday basis to change their training provision. And Christian Stewart from GIZ will take us through the challenges facing the work-based learning, the in-company trainers. So we have a star-studded cast, and we hope that you will join us in the breakout sessions. And our aim is to use a Jamaican approach, so to move from workforce, the TVET workforce matters, to the TVET workforce no problem. So we look forward to you helping with that. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Greenwood, pour cette présentation. Avant de donner la parole à Monsieur Kane, certainement, je dirais que les suggestions sont bien entendues pour tout à l'heure. Je pense qu'ils seront nombreux à s'inscrire à l'atelier, au groupe de discussion sur la thématique. Et c'est intéressant de voir la question de la connexion des compétences et du marché du travail. Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Kane Rolleston.
Okay, that's better. Can we hear? Yes. So I'm Kane Rolleston from UCL Institute of Education. I'm going to talk about a project that is based in the University of Oxford, which is a cross-country comparative study in education in 4 countries. So this is a longitudinal study, the Young Lives study, which focuses on Peru, India, Vietnam, and Ethiopia. It's been collecting data in those 4 countries since approximately 2001. It was established to follow the Millennium Development Goals and to look at progress towards those goals over a 15-year period. So it's a 4-country longitudinal comparative international study which follows 12,000 children, i.e. 3,000 children in each country, approximately from their year of birth up until their 15th year. So we have quite lengthy and robust information on their schooling and also on their preschool experience. It also includes large-scale primary school survey and secondary school survey. Now, what would we be looking for if we're imagining an equitable education system in which teacher education contributes to equality of opportunity? Well, a simple way of conceiving the outcome of an education system which is equitable is that children achieve good levels of learning outcomes regardless of their backgrounds. Now, are there any countries in which that is the case? Of course, there are always variations. There will always be differences in outcomes which are linked to backgrounds, but there are some countries in which educational outcomes are much more equal than in others. And they are places where we can look for teacher education policies which may be associated with equitable outcomes. And one, which forms part of the Young Life study, is Vietnam. And you can see here from the PISA study, an example of a statistic which is quite surprising for Vietnam. So in science, compared to the OECD average of 29%, 3/4 of Vietnamese children from disadvantaged backgrounds, that's the 25% most disadvantaged pupils in Vietnam, perform in the top 25% of all countries' results in PISA. So that's disadvantaged pupils performing better than average in the international study. So it's quite a dramatic result for a country which spends 20 times less, for example, than Finland. Although obviously Vietnam has less money to spend, it is achieving outcomes which are not very much lower than Finland for very much lower costs. Now, what Vietnam is doing is quite different in many ways from other countries. Teachers play a big part in the successes of Vietnam, but clearly teachers in any country work within a system. They are only part of it. Teachers can change their practice, they can improve equity, but there's only a limited amount they can do to change the system. And not all systems, importantly, not all systems are equitable systems. And there are other education systems, including in the Young Life sample. I'm thinking here of India, which we include the states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, in which educational outcomes are not equitable and a system is not designed to achieve equal opportunities. So specifically, education systems in some countries serve to pick winners rather than to equalize outcomes. They do so in order to satisfy what are arguably bad curricula or competitive examination systems which are simply designed to pick a small number of people for particular roles. Now, when countries do that, they produce very unequal outcomes. And in some countries like Peru, educational outcomes are actually more unequal than incomes, which is quite shocking given the high level of inequality in incomes. In such systems, it's often the case that disadvantaged pupils attend considerably poorer quality schools, and that kind of sorting is what accentuates the gap between more and less disadvantaged pupils. Not only their home backgrounds, but their schools differ wildly in quality. And as I said, teachers can mitigate those gaps within the schools that they work, but teachers themselves cannot change the system necessarily. They cannot equalize the gaps between schools. Now, if we want to take an example of a huge gap, India and Vietnam in the Young Life study serves that purpose very well. You can see on the right-hand side here, each bar represents one of the sites in the Young Life study, and that's 20 diverse sites in each country. And in almost every case, the results in our Young Lives 15-year-old maths test are higher in Vietnam than they are in India. And that's to say that even in the most disadvantaged parts, mountainous ethnic minority areas of Vietnam, test scores are still higher than they are in the most urban advantaged areas in the Indian sample, so that's Hyderabad in this case. So the gap is huge between two countries which actually have almost exactly the same per capita income. One of the features of that system difference, as I said, is sorting. So how do children end up in the schools that they actually attend? Well, they're affected by home disadvantage. In any country, there's always a gap in terms of socioeconomic background. But is it the case that lower teaching quality and lower school quality is allocated to poorer children? Much more so in some countries than in others. Even within schools, and particularly this is the case in Peru in the Young Life sample, there are some countries in which there is huge differences within school in terms of how much children benefit from school quality. And I'll give an example of that in a moment. But Vietnam provides an example of a country in which greater equality and reduction in inequality in educational outcomes is associated with better achievement for all. And it's clear that reducing inequality is an important way to improve outcomes for everyone. Now, home background disadvantage, as I said, is a big factor which reduces children's outcomes, but it's also a huge barrier for teachers because teachers must overcome the home background disadvantage of pupils in order to secure effective learning. We can see on this graph, which comes from Ethiopia, that schools in which a high proportion of children had parents who had not been to school, and here we're including both parents rather than just one parent, so children where their mother and father had not been to school were performing particularly poorly in our tests, but also where there was a high proportion of such children in a school, the barriers were very difficult to overcome for teachers, producing very low learning levels overall. So in one sense, the sorting is creating a problem for children, but in another case, it presents a problem for teachers. In India, The system is highly segregated between public and private schools on average produce better learning outcomes, which may not be very surprising. But what surprised me when we looked at this is that even within the private school system, depending on how much you pay, there is a huge difference in terms of school effectiveness. And there's simply a big gap between those schools which charge high fees and those which charge low fees. And actually, lower fee charging schools produce no better learning outcomes on average than a comparable state school. So a lot of it is about the value added that's linked to additional payments in India. And clearly, payment is a way of selecting pupils with different kinds of backgrounds. As I said, in Peru, when compared to Vietnam, we also see big differences in internal school effectiveness. So how effective is a school for two groups of pupils who are, in fact, attending the same school? This is not about segregation, but you could say it is about discrimination. So schools in Peru, when you improve school quality, do not equally benefit all pupils. And actually, pupils with lower socioeconomic backgrounds tend to benefit less from any improvements in school quality, which may be for the reasons of all sorts of barriers that can affect disadvantaged children in the classroom, like, for example, not being able to understand the language of instruction, or not being able to access the textbook or the curriculum, which is often too difficult for pupils with lower levels of prior learning. We see that particularly in contexts where there is very heterogeneous groups of children in the classroom. That kind of discrimination is not necessarily overt discrimination, it's covert discrimination, which is built into the curriculum, but it does directly affect children from disadvantaged backgrounds and does present a barrier for teachers who are attempting to reduce those kinds of gaps. We see the same thing in India, where other studies have shown that teacher matching by, for example, caste or gender, so where there is a smaller social distance between the teacher and the pupil, there tends to be greater levels of learning progress. Now, is that about teachers understanding children's circumstances or not discriminating against them? It's impossible to distinguish those two, but the gap is almost 0.25 of a standard deviation by improving teacher matching. So, coming to Vietnam, which is the country in which we see the least level of inequalities in outcomes and potentially some policies which the rest of us can learn from, Vietnam is a country in which gaps don't necessarily don't necessarily widen over time, but narrow. And you can see here an example from grade 5 where we've tested primary school children at the beginning and end of the school year. And you can see that the difference between ethnic minority and ethnic majority performance is actually shrinking over time. Now, this is a short period, it's just 1 year, but it's not something that we can find in very many countries. It's quite typical that when you look at these kinds of data, you typically see widening gaps. What is it that teachers or systems do differently in Vietnam? It's impossible to say exactly because not very many of the features of education systems automatically are comparable. But 4 things that I've noticed are that teachers in Vietnam have what they need. There is emphasis on fundamental or minimum school quality levels, and those minimum standards are applied especially in disadvantaged areas. Secondly, teachers know what to teach. There is a common centralized curriculum and a set of textbooks which is closely matched to pupils' learning levels. The textbooks are not too difficult, they are closely linked to actual performance levels, and they are focused on a narrow curriculum which contains only 6 basic subjects in primary school. Thirdly, teachers have the knowledge that is required to deliver that curriculum. And in fact, when we examined teacher knowledge across Vietnam, we found very small gaps between the most advantaged and the most disadvantaged areas. So it is not the case in Vietnam that the least well-qualified or the least knowledgeable teachers are deployed to the most disadvantaged areas. And fourthly, students in Vietnam are expected to progress. And this arguably is a feature of all East Asian systems. There's a high level of commitment to mastery by pupils, a use of regular assessment, and an emphasis on students' work rather than on their ability. Just to compare across the 2 countries, India and Vietnam, here are some benchmark figures about differences in resources in primary school. And again, this is a sample from Andhra Pradesh and Telangana versus a sample which is across Vietnam. Indian schools had smaller classes, considerably smaller classes on average than those in Vietnam, but Vietnamese teachers were more experienced. Vietnamese teachers were paid less in US dollars terms, And there were no teachers at all in the sample which did not have, in Vietnam, the required level of teacher qualifications, whereas 16% in India did not have qualifications. Teacher absenteeism is perhaps the biggest gap when you compare India and Vietnam. In India, 35% of pupils said that their teacher often did not come to school, whereas in Vietnam, we could only find an average of 2.34 days of absenteeism for teachers across the whole sample, which is extremely low. Children in Vietnam had access to textbooks and a higher level of teacher response to marking children's homework than in India. Okay, so coming to an example from India of classroom observation, we went to schools where we had already measured the value added. So we'd measured at the beginning of the school year, at the end of the school year, children's test scores. We looked at teacher effectiveness comparing across schools, and then we went back to the schools which we thought were of most interest in order to observe what was happening in the classroom. We found that in India, using a class observation tool which is based on a study which has been done originally in the USA, which contains 3 domains of teacher-student interactions, which are emotional support, classroom organization, and instructional support. We standardized those scores across the 11 domains, and then we look at both private and public schools to see what differences there are in pedagogical approaches. So overall in India, we found that scores on classroom organization and management were high, even compared to the USA, which may be to do with high levels of deference towards teachers and high levels of classroom discipline. Students with higher test scores, however, were found in classes taught by teachers who performed better on the class instrument. So we found what you could argue is better pedagogy in the classes where the children were more advantaged. Now, there's 2 possible directions of causation there. It could be that the teachers are allocated to those students, or it could be that the students themselves choose those schools with better pedagogy. But it's clear that more advantaged pupils have access to better pedagogical techniques. Private schools, on average, were more effective in terms of raising learning outcomes, but not necessarily in using what would be considered more diverse and more interactive pedagogical techniques. So this rather complicated chart here, you can see how teachers, each dot is a teacher, whether they were from private schools or from public schools, how they compare in relation to the value added to their pupils' learning along the horizontal axis, and then up the vertical axis, how their pedagogy was rated on the class instrument, so the standardized classroom observation tool. And you can see that most of the public school teachers are in fact in the left-hand bottom quartile, being lower than average on both measures, but actually there are government teachers who are performing well, both in terms of value added and in terms of pedagogy, and there is a positive relationship between the two. But strangely, somewhat strangely, in private schools, although most of the teachers are better on value added, that is, improving children's examination scores, they're not necessarily better on pedagogy, and there is a negative relationship between the two. Now, what might explain a negative relationship between pedagogy and value added is quite complex, but perhaps private school teachers focus rather exclusively on improving exam scores at the expense of pedagogical techniques. Government teachers have more autonomy and more training, but they often teach more disadvantaged students, and consequently there is much more variation in their effectiveness and also in their pedagogy. Finally, to come to some kinds of conclusions on this, equity is axiomatic for all policies in education, but particularly for teacher policies. There are, however, many routes to the same destination. We've heard about Finland. Finland is a country with almost no standardized testing and with a massive amount of teacher autonomy. However, in Shanghai, you have the opposite, the much lower level of teacher autonomy, much higher level of standardized testing, yet both of them reach exactly the same outcomes in the end on PISA. So perhaps it's about coherence and relevance, choosing the right policies for the right context in combination with the other policies which are needed. We can see there's potential benefits from a balance between autonomy and accountability, from improving teacher education on emotional and instructional support, and also from targeting the minimum standards of learning outcomes and minimum standards of teacher effectiveness. Especially, however, when you target those things in teacher education, then ensuring that those minimum standards of teacher education are deployed effectively so that the least effective teachers are not located in the areas with the most disadvantaged children. Very finally, The last thing to say is that if you are going to develop teacher policies in line with other policies, they have to be linked to issues of curriculum and issues of examination. You can't have teachers guided towards high-stakes examinations and inappropriate curricula whilst at the same time being instructed to deal with heterogeneity in the classroom. Those two things are quite contradictory. What Vietnam has is a mass approach to basic skills. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Le thème est assez passionnant. C'est pour cela que je pense qu'il va se continuer, comme on l'a dit, dans le principe, dans les ateliers de discussion. Merci d'avoir établi la relation entre la qualité de la formation des enseignants et la réalisation effective de l'équité en éducation et de l'égalité. Je voudrais donner maintenant tout de suite la parole au directeur de l'Institut international de l'UNESCO pour les technologies pour l'éducation, M. Tao Zhan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And good morning, dear colleagues. 早上好. It's simply great to be at a great conference like this and in a great place like Montego Bay. And it's my great honor. It's the great honor to have the opportunity to speak at the conference, though it is always challenging to share the same stage with excellent speakers. And, oh, sorry. So for the best presentation on sub-theme 4, you are kindly invited to the breakout sessions, and where you can find more exciting and deeper presentations offered by the team in this area. However, I'm going to do my best. Oh, sorry. I'm going to talk about ICT and nightmares of teachers. And I think it's the right time to talk about ICT because just last week, UNESCO published the new version 3, the so-called ICT competency for teachers. It is understandable that teaching today is becoming a very tough and a challenging job, a challenging promotion. All the teachers, they are expected to be an expert in pedagogy, and meanwhile, they are expected to understand, to master the new technologies. So maybe this is what I call good fortune or nightmare. Let me start with a common observation. And I think most of us believe that ICT has this unique power in transforming teaching and learning today, as well as achieving our 2030 education agenda. And teachers play the most important role for teaching and learning. The right to education means the right to qualified teachers. And from this, therefore, we easily come to the following conclusion. A qualified teacher in the digital age means a teacher with very strong digital skills and ICT competency. So as I just said, teaching becomes a very challenging profession in the digital age. Very often, teachers are expected and even required to master digital skills like experts do. And sometimes teachers are marked or blamed as obstacles in promoting ICT education. We ask ourselves, is it fair or correct? Are we moving in the right direction? I would like to share with you a very common example of my own parents. Both of them are over 80 years old. They understand nothing of ICT. However, every morning, my mother sent greeting messages to all her kids and great children who live all over the world, in Germany, in the United States, in Russia, as I'm working now in Moscow for UNESCO, and in China. She collects the best, most beautiful, many beautiful pictures from her friends and on internet, and also nice articles, and share with all of us. It's always so warm and touching to receive greetings from her. And also she call on video chat to all of us at the weekend. And she can also read text sent by the great kings from United States in English by simply touch the text and choose the option translation into Chinese. So, they understand nothing of ICT, but both of them can use mobile phone and computer almost as well as I do. Why? This is simply because they have a smartphone and a smart app. In China, we call it WeChat, which also is available all over the world. So, digital skills of teachers and digital support for teachers, these are the two issues I would like to share with you some of my observations. I think it is not realistic to expect, even not fair to request all the teachers to master digital skills and ICT competency like experts. And therefore, while teachers are encouraged to improve their digital skills and ICT competency, and while resources, vast amount of resources and energy are invested to the training of teachers, ICT competency, they also need digital support, like the smartphone and smart apps for old people like my parents. Providing digital support environment to teachers should be the shared responsibility of policymakers, educators, private sectors, and the international education community, including all of us. And the first question is, what is the digital support teacher needs in the digital age? What the teachers they need badly in the digital age? The first one I would like to say is a new textbook. I'm a mathematician, I like identities and or equations. In the traditional model, good education means good teacher plus good textbook. And at the digital age, I believe that good education means good teacher plus a smart textbook. So what is smart textbook? Smart textbook, this terminology was already used, has been used by someone. And let me explain briefly. The basic function of a smart textbook consists of the following. It should be online resources and teaching segments supporting classroom teaching. It's an online system supporting students' self-learning and interactive learning. It's an online system monitoring and assisting student learning. And very importantly, it should be a research-driven with new pedagogy and advanced ICT-enabled teaching methods by making use of big data, artificial intelligence, and so on. So, SmartBook is a MOOC? No, SmartBook is not a MOOC, though it shares much in common with MOOC. SmartBook does not replace teachers. Rather, it supports teachers' teaching and supports school-based learning. We may name it as SmartBook, textbook, not SmartBook, smart textbook, or massive open online textbook. I call it MOOC instead of MOOC. So Pearson's e-text provides a good example, though I'm not quite satisfied with the functions already there. We need further development based on their examples. So why do we promote smart textbook or MOOCs? The reason I listed is 4 reasons. Supporting teacher teaching and ICT capacity building. I think teachers' ICT capacity building must be subject-based. Once you have smart textbook, teachers can be trained, can learn automatically and compulsory as every day in the classroom. And secondly, we always talk about mainstream ICT in education. Once the smart textbook is there, you have to use it. It's mainstream. It's in classroom and out of classroom. And it narrows the digital divide and digital use divide between rich and poor once it is shared by everyone, all over the world. And finally, it can transform teaching and learning. And how to promote it? MOOCs. And my suggestion is as follows, that all the textbooks are public funded or purchased with public funds. So the governments or policymakers, they are the duty bearers. To ensure free and quality textbook for kids is a responsibility of governments. And adopting standards of smart textbooks at the national level and redesigning textbooks and reshaping the textbook markets. It's challenging, however, it's very ambitious goal to change the whole structure of textbook. We have the campaign called One Student, One Textbook. So what we really need in the digital age is a campaign for smart textbook for all. And UNESCO, as an international organization and focusing on education, I think we should draft a guide for smart textbooks, assisting member states in design and developing smart textbooks. And very importantly is education publishers. They should set up best examples as pioneers in leading the future learning and teaching. And that's smart textbook. I think once you have the basic infrastructure, assessment to internet, the basic infrastructure, what is the most fundamental environment teachers need? That's a smart textbook or MOOC. And at the school level, we need something else to unify, to collect, to support all the smart textbooks. It must be subject-based model environment supporting teaching, and it provides common tools and environment for teaching, discussion, and communication. As an example, we have Blackboard, Schoology, and also subject-based. For instance, as a mathematician, I like Math Lab. And in one of the presentations in the break section, one of the professors from Smart University is going to talk about a new design of another example. And beyond school level, we need open education resources and then public tools. Hopefully, they are free for all teachers. And now we have plenty of them, but we need more and more open license resources supporting teaching and learning. So, that's the first question. Another question, very briefly. What future support needed for teachers' continuing professional development? I just mentioned something I think which are fundamental for teachers' continuing professional development. The first one is EMAS. That's Education Management Information System. EMAS is like infrastructure, which collects data for teachers and students of schools, and also support teachers' continuing professional development. And particularly when they are moving from one school to another or when they get promotion. For their lifelong learning, lifelong professional development, EMAS is essential for all teachers. And secondly, is a learning community. I think teachers are the ones who really understand teaching, not me. And so building partnership and networking and collecting and sharing best practice, they are the best way, they are the most practical way for us to learn, to meet the challenges. And as I learned from Mr. Adam Dobra, that TTF's secretariat is going to have a knowledge platform. I think it's a good example. And IIT is ready to join with our partners to make our contribution to that platform. And finally, let me mention special support for special needs. For instance, focusing on gender equality and focusing on special education for persons with disabilities, which is one of the priorities at IITE. Finally, let me say a few words about my institute. UNESCO IIT is UNESCO Institute, categorized institute for information technology in education, which was founded 21 years ago in Moscow. Now we have 4 units. It's a nice picture. And my colleague Natalia is here with me. Where is she? It's here. And we are working on policy and research, digital pedagogy, teacher professional development, ICT and health education with a common shared period, that's teachers. And we have a global governing board with a chair. He's the chancellor of Smart University in Dubai. So, welcome to IIT and welcome to Moscow. We are ready to work together with all of you in the future. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Taouzan. Merci pour ces précieuses informations sur ce que devrait être justement l'environnement numérique pour renforcer davantage les capacités des enseignants. Merci tout le monde. Merci aux présentateurs de m'avoir donné l'occasion de respecter le temps. Il ne nous en reste pas beaucoup, mais je pense qu'on pourra donner la parole très rapidement à 2 ou 3 personnes pour réagir. Je veux retenir rapidement que sur la présentation de Madame Tuija, nous avons noté l'idée que la formation des enseignants doit être pratique dès le départ. Nous avons vu la connexion établie avec les compétences du monde du travail pour toujours aider les enseignants à avoir des capacités tout de suite utilisables dans le monde du travail. Et puis également la question, comme je l'avais dit tantôt, de la nécessaire relation entre le niveau de qualification des enseignants et la réalisation de l'équité dans l'éducation. Et enfin, la question des ressources numériques. Merci. Je vois une main à droite, Monsieur Edem, une deuxième à droite, une troisième à gauche, Madame. Voilà, dans un premier temps. Edem, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much. I would like to express appreciation. I will save appreciations. Take it for granted. My question will be to the last speaker about the mood concept, which is a great one, but does it not reduce again the technology mainstreaming in teaching to input? And I would like to see how the interaction, the process of teaching and learning could use that process. I hope the question is clear. The mood is seen as input, again, textbooks, but what we are talking about, the process of teaching and learning, how does technology facilitate and improve that? To all the participants, I would like to take the example of the sub-team 2, who give us a gist of what will happen in the breakout session. Could the other participant also share with us what will happen in the breakout session, so people who have not registered yet know what to expect and to register during the break. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je propose qu'on prenne rapidement d'abord les 3 premières questions. Ensuite, je donne la parole au présentateur.
Thank you very much for the panel. It was very, very interesting. Carlos Vargas from the UNESCO Regional Office for Education in Latin America and the Caribbean. I just wanted to raise an issue about equity, particularly the conceptualization of equity that is used for policymaking processes, but also to assess how equity progresses in different parts. I really like the presentation by Professor Rolston. I think it is really, really interesting. But I think the conceptualization of equity as that of assuring learning outcomes regardless of the background of learners, it is partially limited, and it is problematic at least in two senses, I believe. One of them has to do with the idea of hiding from view the socioeconomic and structural reasons of disadvantage and why learners might be disadvantaged. And in second place, focusing on learning outcomes solely and in-school factors pretty much shifts the responsibility of how we see or who we see is responsible for equity. Then once again blaming teachers or just solely making them responsible for equity. And just to complement this definition, I would just like to share that in 2017 at UNESCO we published a guide for ensuring.
Est-ce que vous pouvez leur laisser le soin de donner des réponses après?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I just wanted to make, just to finish my point, to say that there's a definition of equity and inclusion which is different from that which is utilized for standard testing and which sees equity in a view of justice as the education of everybody being of the same importance. And inclusion, it is not only related to learning outcomes, but to addressing the barriers for access, participation, and benefiting from education. So that's the guide that was published last year, 2017. Thanks.
Merci beaucoup. Je propose que les réponses soient de plus en plus précises et concises pour donner quand même l'opportunité à ceux qui ont présenté de réagir. Je donne à Madame et je vous reviens, Monsieur. Je donne à Madame la parole. Ensuite, je reviens à vous. C'est pour respecter un peu l'équité de genre.
Merci. L'autre, Madame Diallo. Je suis Madame Diallo du Mali et j'ai été très... Allô, merci. Je disais que je suis Madame Diallo du Mali, je suis la directrice nationale de l'enseignement normal, donc chargée de la formation initiale et continue des enseignants. Et j'ai beaucoup apprécié, j'ai apprécié tous les intervenants, mais ce qui a beaucoup retenu mon attention, c'est surtout le problème posé par M. Kane Royston. J'ai bien prononcé. Et la comparaison entre le Vietnam, l'Inde, etc. Et surtout le problème de langue. Est-ce qu'il s'agit de la langue officielle pour l'enseignement ou bien de l'utilisation de la langue maternelle? Parce que c'est un élément très important. Au Mali, vous savez que nous avons les langues nationales, mais nous avons, c'est seulement tout dernièrement qu'on a vu l'importance de la langue maternelle dans l'apprentissage. Et ce qui rend l'apprentissage beaucoup plus facile. Et encore, nous avons des difficultés à faire comprendre cela aux partenaires et aussi à nos compatriotes. Et donc, je voudrais, si possible, avoir la présentation sur version numérique, naturellement, pour que je puisse mieux l'étudier. Le deuxième problème, rapidement,
oui.
Le deuxième problème, c'est celui de Taozan. Au Mali, nous avons la communauté d'apprentissage des maîtres, mais nous venons de commencer tout de suite une expérience pour rendre l'enseignement ludique et l'apprentissage ludique pour les élèves. L'enseignement ludique, c'est-à-dire on s'appuie sur l'éthique pour concevoir des éléments numériques que l'enseignant doit apprendre et après aller en classe pour se former. Là aussi, c'est intéressant. Je ne m'étais pas inscrite, mais je pense que je vais finir par aller là-bas pour joindre les deux bouts, communauté d'apprentissage et et les technologies. Merci bien.
C'est l'intérêt de la réflexion de cadrage, justement, c'est de susciter des vocations vers les ateliers. Oui, je vous donne la parole.
Thank you, Chair. On TVET, there was reference to stigma. This is a big problem in many countries. People look down upon TVET. Okay, it's for those children who have failed to perform better. So how can we tackle that? That's a big issue. And then concerning the Young Lives study, yes, that's useful information, but we should really be careful not to draw simplistic conclusions about Vietnam. Okay, Vietnam spends less on education, but produces better results. They pay teachers less, but the teachers work very hard, as if it is a good example for countries. We need to understand the contextual reasons why the performance is like that. So, and avoid drawing causality and simplistic conclusions from that. It's not always a good example unless we understand what is causing those results. And then finally, on smart textbooks, yes, definitely, but we need a balance. We don't want to have children at the end of the day who will not be able to read any paper, text, or books. So it's a matter of keeping that balance right. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que je vais donner tout de suite la parole successivement à Monsieur Zhang, c'est ça?
Sorry. Okay. Because of time limitation, I couldn't explain much in details about the mood. As I mentioned, it doesn't replace teachers. It doesn't replace classroom teaching. Of course, it doesn't replace paper text even. Yeah, you can combine all this together. As for technical support, how to use IT to assist teaching and training, I think Mood can be designed for pre-classroom, for preparation, and after class for self-assessment and learning, and particularly individual communication between teacher and the students. And if you look at the MOOC, as said, Mood shares much in common with MOOC. However, Mood is not replace teacher and classroom. It assists. Instead, it supports classroom teaching and support teachers teaching in classroom and after class. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I think three replies that I need to give. First of all, to the gentleman who's questioned the definition of equity. I agree that, I mean, it's clearly a very contested area. I mean, I think of equity simply as another word for fairness, and I think that that's fairly uncontroversial. And it's true, entirely true, that learning outcomes is just one metric or one indicator of the success of an education system, and there are a huge number of others that we could choose. But I think wherever you have very large gaps in learning outcomes, you usually have very large gaps in other indicators of success of the education system too. So I don't think you would find that the results would be massively different if you chose, for example, socio-emotional or psychological domains. I mean, you would see similar gaps, whatever the outcomes. But in terms of equity as fairness, I don't suggest that schools should necessarily be treated equally. Some work in more difficult circumstances, and in order to get fairness, you may need to distribute, for example, resources more towards those areas where the difficulties are greatest. For example, Britain has been doing that in recent years with a pupil premium, diverting more resources towards the most disadvantaged pupils. And I would see that as more equitable than a purely equal system, which by default would actually be unfair to disadvantaged pupils. Secondly, on the question of language, I think I understood it without the earphones well enough, but yes, it's true that in India there are a lot of different languages being used for instruction. In Vietnam there are not. Vietnam teaches only in Vietnamese, and there are some pupils for whom Vietnamese is not the first language. But I think that gives an example of India as a kind of experimental testbed, because you have so many different languages being used for instruction in principle, but many students opting to go to schools where actually there is only instruction in English. So private schools nearly always teach in English, and pupils are often in a way prefer, if they are paying, to be taught in English. So they're not being taught in their first language, yet the outcomes are often better. So I think it's quite a complex and confusing picture. There's no doubt that it plays some part in the answer to this question, I agree. And then thirdly, the question of oversimplifying, yes, I agree. I think it's very important not to oversimplify, and I don't suggest that causally one country could adopt another country's policies and have the same success. That's absolutely not the case. But I think it is important to compare what countries are doing, and it is important to be able to say that some countries more efficiently deliver outcomes, or more effectively deliver outcomes. Otherwise, you know, it isn't possible to learn from cross-country comparisons.
Merci beaucoup. Je pourrais peut-être donner la parole aux autres si vous voulez ajouter quelque chose très rapidement. Sinon, on va procéder à la conclusion de cet atelier. Vous voulez juste dire un mot? Oui. And you too?
Yeah, maybe I could just tackle the issues of equity, and perhaps the Hello. Equity, the issue of equity, and the issue of the stigma for TVET. And I think looking at the issue of TVET equity, well, yeah, it's possible to measure access to the system, it's possible to measure outcomes, and it's possible to measure your labor market performance. But at the end of the day, it is perhaps labour market performance which is most important to the equity within the TVET system. That drives the people's coming into the system. It drives the type of courses that should be offered. But without a nuanced policy, you cannot manage practical divides, such as the urban-rural divide. So the individual choice is not enough to overcome the context in the country. So some kind of nuanced policy there needs to be. On the stigma, I would, to some extent, make the same issue. People join the TVET system because they think there is a chance of individual success, or that's a family judgment. And we are facing clear competition in terms of TVET with the higher education system. That in many countries of the world, people are preferring to opt to join the higher education system because there is a sense that this is individual progress. And I think that now with the changes in the TVET system, the changes in the environment, there are more opportunities for the people with TVET skills, and we should take every opportunity to communicate these opportunities that TVET graduates have, ensure the quality and relevance of the TVET system, ensure that people are aware about champions, that we celebrate the successes of the TVET system, and make sure that this creates some kind of impetus within the system itself.
Merci beaucoup. Une minute aussi, une dernière minute.
Yes. Okay. Just before the coffee break, I think that I also tapped with the equity, and I think that equity is the equal position or equal possibilities to have a quality education, but it's also equal possibilities or participation in the education system, in school system, and also participation as full citizen in the community. It's ownership of one's lifestyle and one's culture, And it's about ownership of learning and the education system. And that means that when we develop our education system, we should listen to local communities and work with them rather than for them. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à tout le monde. J'aimerais quand même que vous m'autorisiez à dire un mot également sur 2 points très rapidement. Le premier, c'est que nous sommes rassurés au regard de ce qui a été dit sur les TIC, par exemple, sur le numérique, que finalement, le numérique va être un intrant au service de l'enseignant, mais il n'effacera pas l'enseignant. Le deuxième point, c'est que je voudrais partager aussi une expérience qui se déploie actuellement au Sénégal, où le ministre de l'Éducation nationale a mis en place, justement pour promouvoir les TIC dans l'éducation, un système d'information du ministère de l'Éducation nationale où il y a des applications autour desquelles l'ensemble des enseignants, des élèves et même des parents ont un identifiant qui leur permet d'avoir accès à des applications qui leur permettent pour les parents d'avoir des informations sur le niveau d'évolution de leurs enfants, pour les enseignants d'avoir à leur disposition des ressources numériques. En philosophie, par exemple, des cours ont été faits, stabilisés par l'inspection générale et des experts. Et ces cours sont en ligne aujourd'hui et permettent aux enseignants qui sont dans des endroits très reculés de pouvoir également renforcer leurs capacités et de les utiliser au service des enseignements-apprentissages. Bon, je pense que ça s'est bien passé pour ce matin. Nous sommes à l'heure et que nous allons certainement aller vers la pause déjeuner. Je vous remercie tous. Je vous remercie pour votre écoute. Je voudrais redonner la parole à l'organisation. Merci.
Thank you very much to the panel and to the moderator. Now we are going for coffee break, and after coffee break, you will break in 4 breakout rooms. Please do not forget to leave your headset in the room. There will be headset in the room of the breakout. So again, breakout 1, knowledge, skill, and competencies will be at room C1 at block C. Breakout 2, on teacher training, skills, and competency for work will be at room C4. Breakout 3 on promoting equal learning opportunity will be here, so you just come back from coffee break and you come here. And breakout 4 on teacher education and digital and continuing professional development will be at room C6 at block C. I know that there are people who did not register to the breakout. It doesn't matter. You just choose the one you want to go to and you go there, and we will circulate a list and you will write your name there. Please, people will be at 10 to 11. People will be ushering you to the rooms. Please follow them. We really want to have successful sessions. Thank you.
Should I say it? Can you take the picture? Yes. Yeah, let me come down. I'm going down to take it.